Hello and welcome to our webinar series from Lean Focus. This month's topic is visual management for remote and on-site product development teams. In a minute, I will introduce you to your panelist, George Ellis, who is the leader of our innovation practice at Lean Focus, who will walk through this topic on visual management with you. Next. This presentation is proprietary. You will receive an email copy of this recording that you can watch this presentation at any time that you may like. You can also forward that link to others in your organization who can take part in this webinar as well. Next. Some housekeeping instructions before we get started. So all participants will be placed in listen-only mode. At the end of today's session, there will be about 15 minutes for Q&A. You can actually type your questions into the question chat panel into the GoToWebinar display panel. Additionally, in that display panel, you will notice that there are handouts. There are 4 handouts specifically that you can download during this webinar in the control panel, and they are as follows. There's an innovation assessment that describes how you can assess your innovation process inside your company end to end. There's actually a self-assessment as well, which is another attachment that you can do to assess the current state health of your organization's innovation process. Then there's an overview on the innovation practice at Lean Focus, and then there's a one-page sheet that describes the visual project management tool that George will be going into in depth. All of these can be downloaded during this presentation. As I mentioned, a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you. It will actually come one day later. Sometimes it goes into your spam folder. So if it did not go into your inbox, check your spam folder and you should see it there. Next. A little bit about Lean Focus before we get into the presentation. So Lean Focus is a consultancy that helps our clients build high-performance cultures, and high-performance cultures are 3 parts. It takes driven leaders who are leading the transformation across the enterprise that use lean thinking in how they lead and drive the transformation inside the business. Additionally, there is a set of foundational lean guiding principles that support every transformation to help organizations make the right decisions on the lean journey. And lastly, there's a set of tools which formulate systems, one of which is the innovation system that we'll talk about today, that help organizations transform and drive sustainable results over time. Next. Just a snapshot of some of the clients that we work with at Lean Focus that we help to put in place the high performance cultures that we just mentioned on the previous slide. It's a broad variety of different industries, different types of businesses, both manufacturing, service-oriented, and even the types of manufacturing that these companies may do can oftentimes vary between discrete manufacturers and continuous manufacturers. The common thread that all of these companies share is that they are on a lean transformation journey, and they too are trying to put in place some of these practices and ways of thinking throughout their company. Next. So when I talked about systems, we use the Lean Focus business system to help our clients transform. The piece of the business system that we're going to be focused on today resides in the growth side of what we do. We refer to that as the growth system. And a subset of that growth system is the set of tools around innovation, which George is going to go into detail on in today's presentation. Next. And it's my distinct pleasure to introduce you to our panelist today, George Ellis, who is the Vice President of Lean Focus's Innovation Practice. George?
Hi, I am really glad to be here, and especially glad because we're talking about probably my favorite single subject in all of innovation, visual project management. And so happy to be here. Thank you guys for joining. My background is that I spent about 35 years working with Danaher and went through a spinoff as we spun off the dental group into Invista, and joined Lean Focus pretty much the first opportunity I got. I have to say it's been a very rewarding time so far with the group, it's really fun to spend 100% of your time in transformation for innovation. Today's agenda is, we've already had the introduction. We'll talk a little bit about the problems, like why are we even here discussing this? I want to break out for a moment and just talk about the cost of delay in new product development. So I'll show a couple slides there because so much of what we're doing is trying to prevent delay. Then we'll move into visual project management and then to some stuff that, up until this point, I think a lot of it's quite common. We'll also move into some things we got from Eli Goldratt, the bottleneck constraint and fever chart from back in the 90s when he developed these things. But we'll put them to use in a little bit more modern way than maybe you've seen before. And then we'll talk about some next steps. So that's where we're headed. The first thing I want to say is the innovation journey is a big journey. If you look at from Aspire, which is, what customer segment do we want to serve? How do we want to manage our intellectual property? And you go all the way over to the right and deploy, how do we know that that launch was successful, and how are we doing a great job sustaining our products? That's probably for most companies between 5, maybe 8-year journey. So today we're just going to be talking about one part of that journey, which is visual project management. So we divide that journey into Aspire, where we decide what we want to do, Discover, where we really define the projects, Design, which is where the real money is spent in projects. Probably 80% of what we spend is spent in design, and then Deploy. Did people actually buy these things, and do they like them? If we're not selling them, that means customers don't value them. So it's really important for us to go through this entire journey. But for project management, what's the burning platform? Well, it's really we either have late projects or half-done projects, and they perform poorly. I think if you've spent much time in project management, you know that we disappoint customers because we miss dates, we miss commitments to the organization that funded the project. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. You start losing confidence from your sales team and your marketing team. Oh, those guys always say this is going to be ready. We'll get ready when we see it coming. And you open the door for competitors. You go out and you develop a need, you explain it, and then you can't fulfill it. So the performance of late projects is poor, and then late projects are expensive. It's not unusual to see projects go 6 months, 12 months late, and the budgets are high. And so for one bit of outside data, here's an outside study that shows that when people invest in proven practices, they waste much less money. And in another publication, we found that what are the top 5 reasons for project failure? And they're changing priorities, changing the project objectives, which is commonly known as scope creep, inaccurate requirements, which is we really didn't understand the project, we didn't really define it, inadequate vision. We didn't, we're coming out with version 7.3.2. Aren't customers going to be excited about that? And then poor communication about all these things, especially dates slide, the sales force doesn't know it, they get caught. We have changes in priorities, changes in resources, and all that communication. Well, these are the top 5 things, and as you can see here, the participants could select up to 3 causes. And the net is that 50% of projects, 50% of people indicated that the projects, they fail to consistently achieve what they're meant to achieve. So late projects, I think, that's the burning platform, and we want to bring out projects on time, on spec. I want to pause for a moment and talk to you about a way of looking at problems, and I'll pull right back into our presentation in a second. But think of the tree of a symptom, problem, and causes. So the symptoms are the things I feel. Maybe I feel tired, I have cold chills, I have a headache. The problem, I can measure the problem. I take my temperature, I can see it's 103. And the root cause is hidden. It's structural. In this case, I chose a perforated appendix. It's what we need to know if we're going to fix the problem. A lot of discussion around what's going on in project management, people get confused between symptoms, problems, and causes. And so we'll want to keep that straight. So let's talk about a few symptoms of projects. We have systemic project slips. I remember asking one company, I said, we really need to write down what percentage of your projects came in on time over the last 2 years. And I couldn't get a straight answer. And then I got an answer a little bit later. Well, it's 0. We haven't had one project come in on time. I worked in an organization where I worked with project managers that I was working on. They worked on them for 10 years, and they had never seen, it's a different organization, never had one of their projects come in on time. Another symptom is changing priorities. This project's just critical, we've got to do it. Next month, it seems like another project's critical. And resources it's hazy on where they go, and then people lose their resources. And then when we come back around in the rotation and your project comes back to being critical, you have problems. Scope creep, we talked about a little bit. Sometimes scope creeps and it makes the project 2 or even 3 times as costly and time consuming as was expected. And poor communication we already talked about. And so what's the measurable problem? More than 75% of our projects are late to market. Now, this is common. I would say that of the companies I've worked with, probably something between a fourth and a third of projects come in on time. So this is measurable. We can look and see how many came in on time to the original commitment, but that's not a root cause. And that's not really something, if you'll notice everything we've gone through so far, they're not things that we can treat. So let's look at some things that we can treat so that we can deal with this problem and eliminate these symptoms. One of the problems is we failed to build consensus around scope at the outset. You've seen this, right? A project manager comes in, they have an 800-line Gantt chart, they meet with the person in marketing, they lay out the entire project, but they don't talk to the team very much. And then we get a third of the way into the project and the team's like, I never saw that before. That's not possible. We left things out. So there's that failure to build consensus and not use the team. Confusion at handoffs, right? That's just huge. So perhaps you'll send somebody an email and you think they understand they're supposed to do something and they don't really understand it, or they didn't plan for it, or they didn't even read the email. And there's no single point of truth. I've visited clients very recently, as the last handful of days, and you can't look at the project and say, well, where did we say we'd be by January 30th, and where are we actually? If you think about it, that's the sort of question your GPS answers for you in a 1/10 of a second. But I've been with companies where you can spend hours and not get that answer. And then finally, lack of communication. We've talked about that a lot. When you're working on a project and you're staying and you're working late and putting in hours and you feel the pressure, and then all of a sudden it's not important or doesn't seem as important. Some other project got called out and you're being asked to go spend time on other things when you're behind on this. Did the priority change, or am I just going to get in trouble later if I go work on that and leave this undone? And so that lack of communication, it keeps us all from rowing together. So we're going to talk about how visual project management deals with that. But first, I want to take a small pause and talk to you about the cost of delay. And I talk about delay a lot because time is what Eli Goldratt would call the bottleneck constraint of project management. And we'll have some time to talk about that in a few minutes. I hope you'll find it very interesting. It changed my life when I started reading him. But I just want to talk about time in this one context. If I look at this is called the iron triangle of project management. This diagram that you see, I've seen it from documents as old as the 70s. In a project, there's the time to complete, the requirements that are necessary in the budget, and you can't change one without changing the others. But what happens to us when we just delay a project? Well, a couple of things happen. First, if we just delay a project, we get an overrun of budget, right? If we go over 10% in our time, we probably are going to run over 10% or something like that in our budget. But we also get to market late. And we delay the introduction of the project, bringing value to our customers. Now, what about if I have a slip in requirements? Well, that's a little bit of both. It's like part of the project's on time and part of it's late. I still got to keep the team together. It's a little more confusing. What I want to do with you guys over the next minute or so is just focus on this one area. I think budget's easy to understand. Let's talk about what is the cost of delay. When we delay a project, let's say we take a project, and this is our project, these are our projections. We're going to hit a revenue of $4 million a year, a few years out, and this is kind of the life we see of the project. And if we delay it 3 months, somebody might say, oh, we'll lose the first 3 months of revenue. That's not very much. and they look at that tiny sliver. Well, but if I really look, that entire growth curve is pushed out, right? I mean, if I don't get that product to market, the whole growth curve pushes. It's not like I introduce the product 3 months later and I can make up for all those lost calls. And the total lost revenue is the difference between those two. And if I take that and reform it, what you'll see is that it's the amount of time, if I reshape it, it's essentially I've lost 3 months at peak revenue. And the net of that is that if I have a project that is going to earn $4 million a year in its peak, and I introduce a 3-month delay today, I haven't lost that tiny sliver you saw over on the left to start with. I'm losing $333,000 per month. In other words, a 3-month delay is something like losing, excuse me, I'm a little trouble with the mouse getting ahead of me. It's something like losing $1 million of revenue. And so as you're thinking about your decisions, and when you bring in your decision making to, wow, I see a delay, I've got to do something about it, I got to really take action, don't just think about the budget. Think also about the lost opportunity with customers. You may find that the loss of delay is much larger, and it really makes more informed decision making. So now let's get back to our main point. How do we use visual management to reduce delay? Well, this is a visual action plan. I call it a visual action plan. You could call it a visual project plan. Sometimes it's called a master schedule or a zone schedule. There are lots of names for it, but essentially think of it like an action plan laid out in a different format. Now, some of you who are used to Gantt charts, you might think of this as a Gantt chart, but it's not. And I'm going to explain why in just a minute, what makes this different from a Gantt chart. Not that Gantt charts are bad, they just don't fit here. And we'll talk about all of that in the coming few minutes. But let's go back to my analogy about this being a visual action plan. What's a good action plan show? Well, it shows an owner, and what you can see here is our owner. I am really struggling with my mouse here. The owner is in a swim lane, so everything an owner owns is shown in a swim lane. And you can see also my whole project, even though this project is this phase of the project is 5 months long, it all fits on one page. I have a swim lane that has an owner. I have and then I have these 2 gates. We'll talk about what these gates are in just a second. Most of you who are doing product development, you have some sort of a phase gate system, something that gets you from project approval to launch, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then there's tasks in between that have to be done. Well, that's just an action plan, right? An owner, a start and a stop date, and the name of the action. But it's laid out in graphical form. It's very easy to analyze or to, I should say, consume what this schedule is trying to show you. This simple formula is going to be, this simple view is going to be very important as we move on. And I should have mentioned there's an optional dependency arrow. In other words, if you want to, it's generally assumed that when projects move left to right, they're dependent, and then you can add dependency arrows, to show that one task needs to be largely completed before the other can start. Now let's talk about phase gate systems. If you're in the medical devices business or any kind of regulated business, you might think of it, you might call it a quality management system, but there's something where you're structured there's very structured of the things that you have to do. But before we think about that phase gate system, think about the commercial milestones. Just about every company has got these 3 critical commercial milestones. When that project comes into my view, maybe you have a funnel that's formal, maybe it's just in people's heads, that's okay. But then I'm going to come to a point where I'm going to commit resources to the project. So I bring it into the funnel. I think, we define it, we investigate it. I commit where I sign on the dotted line, and then at some point I launch the project. Just about every organization has all 3 of these. Now, what most organizations also have is they'll have some sort of a phase gate system where there are gates that you have to pass, and there are phases of work. And those phases of work may have a lot of detail in them. So what you'll see that I drew for you below actually it's just a subset, right? There are typically 100 requirements, especially if you're in a regulated industry, but even if you're not. And so when you think about getting to those gates, you have to complete all of the things that are in that phase. But you know, what I want to get across to you is every company has a different phase system and different gate system, but almost everyone has some sort of a funnel, commit, and launch date that those phase gate systems fit into. So we're going to work within that system. Nothing I'm going to say today is going to change for you if you're using a phase gate system. This visual project management works great in systems like that. So now I want to take you to a view. I call it 3 views so we can have comprehensive action. And I want to make an analogy to to a trip, right? If I want to make a long trip, let's say I'm going to drive from California to Alabama. You know, I need a big view. I need a map so I can see where I'm going and I can see my progress day by day. And so we think of that as the project view, the entire project from at least from the signing of the pen to the launch, let's say, maybe even going back further. So think of that. Think of that's our map view, our project view. Then there's a phase view. You know, hey, when we've defined in our phase gate system from phase 3 to phase 4 looks like this. That's a narrower view of the project. It's a piece of the project, and think of it like a GPS. And then finally, think of the sprint view when people are actually doing work on a short term. They're on a, they're thinking shorter term. What am I going to get done this week? And that's more like looking out the windshield. What I want to get across to you is no one of these is the most important. They're all important, and they're all necessary for a successful journey from California to Alabama. And so when we look at our projects, we also want to be looking at these same views. They're all important to us, but we use them very different ways. So here's a simple project. Obviously, this is highly simplified. You can see there's only 6 or 8 blocks in this project. And in a normal one, there'd probably be, what, 30 or 40? It still fit on one page. But this would be the entire project from beginning to end. Maybe years would elapse along these major gates. And that's a view I need to see. If I'm a manager of a company, I want to understand where are we right now in our whole journey. Now, when I want to work as a development group, that's very coarse granularity. So I really want to be looking typically at phase to phase. And the idea is, hey, if I can hit my gate 3 on time, my project's still on time. That's kind of the assumption. And that's, I think of that as like the GPS view, and this is the phase view. This is the view that we're going to be concentrating on as we keep talking. The last view is the sprint view. Now, this is where you actually have teams of developers, software developers, web developers, engineers, hardware engineers, you name it, and marketers, and they're all working on probably different methods. Your typical hardware team is very comfortable with the Gantt chart. Software teams, most software teams today are using Agile, so maybe they're using Jira Agile. And marketing teams, maybe an action plan is what's best for them. The point is, when we get down to that windshield layer, every team can pick that method that is best suited to what they're developing and the history in their company. What we're really here to talk about is that phase view, which is what's keeping all of those different teams aligned. All right, so so our focus in visual project management is above that. So what I want to say to you is that if you're using Gantt charts and somebody else in your company is using Agile and there's a discussion, no, we should be using Agile, we should be using Gantt, no, we got to do it the same. My answer back to you is no, you don't. Actually, I've watched projects run with multiple ways down at the sprint level and the functional teams operating. It all works just fine. We're going to bring them together in a very simple way. Now, I need to diverge for a moment and talk to you about one of the most brilliant concepts that I learned about through project management called the bottleneck constraint. And what is the bottleneck? It's the primary limit to throughput. And well, let me explain what I mean by that. Let's say that you're a farmer and you have 100 acres of a flooded field. Where are you going to take your tractor and dig it out? I use this example because I live on a farm, not quite big enough to have this problem, but I understand that when you have a flooded field, there are 100 places you could take that tractor and make that field better. But there's one place where you see the water flowing and you dig it out and you watch it. I see, oh, the water's flowing more. I'm making progress. I'm going to keep digging here. Why does it matter? Why is the bottleneck so incredibly important for the highly technical things we do, even though I'm illustrating them with a tractor? It's because, sorry, let me go back up here. It's because thinking in the bottleneck gives you a continuous experiment. You see, if I go work where the bottleneck is, I watch the bottleneck release and I watch the flow. And this leads us to why Eli Goldratt said there are 100 good things to do. There are only one or two that really matter. Because here's the fact. If you go work anywhere in that field that's not going to help it flow, you might be doing good, you might not. You'll never know. It's only by working at the bottleneck that you can see it's working. So I want to give you a simple example using driving. I love driving because driving's full of autonomous people working together to make a system. And there's a lot of things that affect how long it takes me to travel, right? How long is it going to take me to get there? Do I have gas? You know, could I get a ticket? You know, but I've got to get to this building. Let's say I've got to get there for an interview, and it's really critical that I make it on time. You know, do you drive with a set of 7 KPIs next to you and do your KPI? Did I get a ticket the last 10 miles? Am I having mechanical problems? No, you don't do any of that. When you have a place to get to on time, you know all these constraints are there. What do you do in your mind? This is naturally the way you think. Time is your bottleneck. That interview is at 1. My GPS says I'm going to get there at 10 till 1. Oh no, I can't afford anything. And so we think of things as a bottleneck, time. I've got to figure that out. Now, does that mean that we do something foolish, like say, oh, I might, what if the gas tank's almost empty? Oh, I'm not going to pay attention to that. I just have to think about time. Of course, we don't do something foolish like that. We look at gas, but we convert it to time as a subordinate. In other words, if I had to get gas, how much time is that going to take me? If my tank is a little bit low and I've only got 7 minutes on my GPS, I might be willing to take more chances. If I've got a half an hour, I'm going to stop. I'm going to go buy Starbucks. And this is how we divide out subordinates. And we think of subordinates, and I want to introduce you to this term reflection. I love this. You see, if I know I'm out of gas, let's take that second one. If I know I'm running out of gas, I say to myself, a stop for gas is 10 minutes. You see how I took gas and I made it in the same scale of the same currency of my bottleneck. Or, hey, I know if I leave around lunchtime, the traffic's going to be high. I've got to add 10 minutes. Now, traffic is not, you know, how do you measure traffic in time? How do you measure gas in time? It's how is it going to affect the delivery of, you know, in this case, getting to my interview on time. So how do we apply this to project work? Well, in project work, we also have multiple constraints. So think of it, we think about schedule, the quality of the work, compliance to rules, our whole budget, is our customers liking it, financial return, and, you know, am I making people crazy? Is my engagement so bad people are leaving? And we can divide those up the same way. We can think about them as a bottleneck, and Goldratt told us that in projects, schedule is almost always the bottleneck. And then we can have non-negotiables, which I say are compliance. What I mean by that is we're not going to go be non-compliant to a rule and see how it works out. We know how it works out. We're not going to violate that. And maybe we could say it's subordinate in the sense if somebody says we're not meeting a rule, we've got to go spend a month to meet that rule. The other one is employee engagement, non-negotiable. We can't have people leaving at such a huge cost. But everything else, you know, will actually balance that with schedule. And you may say, we don't, but you do. Like, for example, quality. We're not going to trade quality for schedule. Yes, you are. You will definitely change because there's a level of quality you'll accept, a certain amount of parts per million that we can accept. We know if we work longer on it, we could make it lower. Even Toyota does that. So it's not that we have to be, schedule, it's what level of quality are we going to demand? And then how does that demand reflect to schedule and customer satisfaction or financial return? So let me just show you what I mean here. So if I look at financial return, maybe I go to the boss and I say, we found a new feature we can add. It's going to give us $300,000 per year of revenue, and it's only a 6-week delay. See the reflection? Customer satisfaction. We just failed a customer trial. They hate it. And now we got to go back and work on several things that's going to cost us 4 weeks. I live this. I remember this from about 8 years ago. We had a project that was exactly that. Quality, we found defects and we've got to go back and fix them. Or I need to hire a consultant. I'm running behind. If you'll let me hire this consultant for only $75,000, we can pick up 6 weeks. It's so much more powerful than saying, I need a consultant. I'm too busy. You've reflected it into into the main, into the bottleneck constraint. So we've talked about bottleneck. I'm going to switch topics on you one more time. We'll bring all this together, but I want to introduce you to these topics. I told you it's my favorite topic. There's so much to it. Think about buffer. If you say you're going to go to the store and you need to go to the store and come back, and you know it's probably going to take you about a half an hour. You throw some buffer in there, a few extra lights, a stop you didn't expect. You know, I'll throw a little buffer in. And when you're doing one simple thing like that, buffer is just natural. As humans, we all do it. The problem we get into is we just in a project schedule where we're running different parts of our project, that buffer gets distributed and wasted. So buffer is good. Distributed buffer is bad. Let me explain why. And these are all taken, again, a lot of these learnings come from Goldratt. And this is what he called the student syndrome. I have a task. I allow myself a long buffer. I allow 1 month to complete it. I know it really only takes a week to do it, so I wait till 1 week before to start. It's called the student syndrome for the obvious reason. But do you see the buffer is completely wasted? We had 3 weeks of buffer in this schedule. It did nothing to protect it did nothing to protect our schedule. So that's one reason, and this is what distributed buffer does to you, because people just kind of wait till the last minute, they wait till they're pushed, and all that buffer, it's all just wasted until you get to the end and find out you're late. And that's when you learn it's been wasted. The opposite of that is what Goldratt, he used the term from, what was his first name? Cyril Parkinson, who wrote on this. I know he wrote in The Economist in 1958 on this topic of work grows, the allotted work grows into what's available. And he actually did some pretty sophisticated mathematical studies on it. It's not just a saying. But the idea is here, Parkinson's law is, hey, I've done something, it's good enough, but I just keep working on it. Sometimes in lean thinking, you'll hear this called gold plating, putting gold plating on something a customer doesn't care about being gold plated. It's the same idea. But let's say I'm supposed to go out and get 3 quotes. I get 3 quotes in a week, but I think I can do better. I'm gonna go get 5 quotes on a part, or 6. You see, I've done enough to meet the requirements in a week, but I just keep fiddling with it. You know, there's not a lot of incentive to turn it in early. And that buffer's also wasted. It does nothing to protect the schedule. So those two are examples of how buffer, you can have a lot of buffer and have it bring no value whatever. So what we want to do is take all of that distributed buffer and we just want to squeeze it and just take all of it out so that we run the individual tasks of our project line to line, or what you might call best case, and we leave 6 week, when we leave, in this case, 6 weeks of buffer. So we just took all the buffer that was in there, we squeezed it out, we put it at the end. This brilliant concept allows us to keep our teams on a stretch goal constantly, but protecting the schedule. So when we talk to the boss, we talk about July 7th, but when we work as a team, we work to June 3rd. And I've learned this with teams, you have to honor that. I never told the boss about the June 3rd date. I always talked about how are we doing to the June 12th date. When using this method and I'm going and reporting up, the boss doesn't need to know about this. What the boss might ask you is, how are you doing in terms of your buffer? If you have someone that's particularly interested, most people just say, how are you doing on the July 12th? But the point I want to get to is the team is constantly working towards June 3rd. So if we get done with something early, we take it, we grab it, and we go on and get the next thing, versus waiting until that distributed buffer runs out. And that's the beauty of using a buffered schedule. Now, so what we use to track it is something called a fever chart. So this is a fever chart, and it's really simple. I know it looks complicated. When you look at it, it can look overwhelming, but I'm telling you, you can draw this you can just use colored tape, a piece of paper, and a magic marker. And I've done it that way plenty. I've also done it electronically. It doesn't matter. It's a very simple diagram. The width of you just draw a box. The width of it is the full project. Do you guys see how that project goes out right out here to July 12th? So that's the end of the project. The top is that 30 days of buffers. You remember how we squeezed out 30 days? That's the vertical. And now what we do is maybe every day, every other day, we meet as a team. We talk for 10 minutes. How is this going? Is that on time? Oh, we lost a day. Oh, bam, we lost a day of buffer, and we show it as a small black dot. When we burn more buffer than this linear estimation expects, we're in the red. Now we know to take action. And that's the beauty of the fever chart in this way of tracking buffer, is that it immediately gives us an immediate call to action, so that we're not waiting and we're not finding out about it a month later. As a project manager, time is your best friend. The more time you get to deal with an issue, the more likely you're going to be successful dealing with it. And so the point of this buffer chart, and really guys, I'm not exaggerating, it's a 10-minute meeting. We go over and look at the board, or we look on our screens on the digital board. It doesn't matter, make a bit of difference whether it's in PowerPoint or Post-its. We go through and ask people, how did you do today? That should be a 1-minute conversation. I'm late, I'm on time. Am I late? Here's my forecast of how late I'm gonna be. Don't tell me the stories of how you got late. Don't tell the stories about how you got pulled off or that you're very busy. It's not the time for it. We do need to hear that, but not now. This is a 10-minute meeting. We're going to spend 5 of it saying, hey, since the last 2 days, where are we? And if we've lost time, we're going to say, everybody agree? It looks at us like we've lost 2 days of buffer. Bam, we add 2 days of buffer. Black dot goes here. Are we in the red? Yes. We got to pull a team off and solve it. Are we in the red? No? Good to go. See you tomorrow. That's how simple it is. So let me see here. And so this is that. So think of it as, we're going to get together. We're going to update our progress in 5 minutes. We're going to update the fever chart in 5 minutes. We're going to allocate our buffer burn. I'll talk to you about what that means in a moment. That's really easy to do. That's another 90 seconds. Am I in a red light? No, I'm in a green light. I'm done. Am I in a red light? Yes, I'm in a red light. I've got to run a play. I got to go make up some time, because we're not going to accept being in the red. And I put in here, plays are where the rubber meets the road. That's where we do something. So anytime someone brings you a new project management technique, I want you to always ask that person, how does this change what we do? Okay, it's a very pretty diagram. I like it. I can see what's going on, but how does it change what we do? This is the page that tells you how it changes what we do. Because if we burn enough buffer to get in the red, we're going to go problem solve. If we can do it in the meeting, sometimes you can do it in the meeting in just a minute or two. You can just say, hey, Joey will help Janet. You guys can go help work on that for 2 days. Joey, I think I'm going to go get you some cover from that other project you're working on. Bam, we're done. But maybe it takes an hour to work it out. In that case, stop the 10-minute meeting, send everybody on, call a small group together. Don't live with it. Don't live with your project being in the red. And so this is just a schematic for you to see that, on the left side there is the best case project, that one that we squeeze down. On the right is our consolidated buffer. No tasks are in there. Of course they're not. It wouldn't be buffer if you had a task in there. And then what we're going to do, and it's a little hard to show you in such a short format. I'm going to run out of time, I'm sure. But the whole way that we manage the buffer, write the dates, watch the black dots going up, I would just tell you it's fast, and it just takes a minute, and it works. It brings projects in on time. So, and then the last thing I want to tell you about fever charts is, it's not just the fever chart calls us to action. That's the number one thing. But let me show you 2 other things it does that I just love. First off, on the left in the pale yellow, you see a single project history. And I can look at, there's 3 projects where I can look at their fever charts, and I can tell you a ton about those projects, not knowing a thing about what they did. I don't know if they were doing a medical device, or someone was developing an industrial device, or if someone was just developing a website. I couldn't tell you that. But you know what I can tell you? That top project, that team has been through the ringer. When you see a team that goes into the red, they see they're in the red, they pull back out. This team did it twice. They are tired. I can tell you, when you look at teams who have done this before, they look tired. They need a break. And you don't want a lot of projects like this in your life. I would say that a project like that, you learn a lot. One thing people learn is they change how they schedule themselves. They get more realistic about scheduling, because they're like realizing, wow, that took a lot longer than I thought it would. But the second one is what I want to call more is better thinking. We're late, it's okay. We're late. Hey, everybody, go try harder. I don't know how to do it. Do your best. You guys know that more is better thinking. I call it hard work, but lazy thinking. You're always trying to do something better. You're constantly gold plating, but to what end? The project's late and you're not making it up. People who are engaged in more is better thinking, it's not that there's something wrong with them. It's not that they have some kind of a deep-rooted problem. It's that we have to get them focused on a scoreboard that says, when this thing's in the red, we're going to get it out of the red. I can tell you one of the things, one of the organizations where I worked, we had a rule. If you're you need to be having a project meeting at least every other day on any $1 million plus project. Okay, it's not too much to ask for the team to meet for 10 minutes on a large project like that. If you're in the red for more than 2 days, you're going to get help, which means the boss is going to call you in for a meeting and we're going to go through it and we're going to figure out why you're in the red and we're going to get you out of the red. Now, sometimes it's really hard. And look, guys, I'm going to be honest. Sometimes it's impossible to get out of the red. You know, you run into a patent issue, a major material failure, and you have to go back. Okay, it happens 1 in 20 times. Most of the time, you can find your way through it if you start fast. Pull that vendor in. I remember one time, you know, we were running late and we we had a vendor that wouldn't deliver and they kept not delivering. You know what we did? We put our team in a van and they drove for 3.5 hours and stayed with the vendor for 3 days. You know what? We got out of the red. We would have never gotten out of the red if we'd have lived in that more is better thinking world. I'll call the vendor, I'll fuss at them. You know what I'm talking about. It's that drive that this is our scoreboard and we're staying out of the red. Oh, and also, if I'm in the red for 2 days and I got this report, I had my admin prepare this report for me every morning. I got this report every morning, started 15 minutes looking at this report for all 20 of my projects that were going on at one time. I'm looking at all of them. And if somebody's in the red and they weren't yesterday, I want to know about it and I want to see what they're doing about it. So, that's the difference between the first and second. The third, I call it ineffective schedule management, and it's a serious problem. And that means that we went from somehow being on time and no buffer loss to bam, we're late. Well, what does that tell you? Outside of the most unusual circumstances, somebody's not paying attention. You either have the wrong person in the job, or the person just doesn't understand how to use the tool, or they need to get training. But I will tell you, when I see that third one, that's really serious. The middle one, I don't like it. We'll work with the team, we'll get there. That last one, that's a serious business. Look at that, how you can tell that in seconds. Is that a medical device? Is it a website? I don't care. It's the same answer. Over on the right, one of the other things we can do is every time there's a buffer burn, we can allocate it to the swim lane it was in. And now we can collect that, oh, we lost 2 days. Where did we lose it? We lost it in firmware test. Okay, that's a 2 in firmware test for today. Let's keep moving, guys. Where am I burning my buffer? And what that allows me to do then is over multiple projects, over multiple months, I can collect where am I burning buffer. So, hey, in this case, I'm burning my buffer in optical design. Hey, let's go do an improvement on optical design. Maybe we need to improve the way that we test or the way that we plan, but let's go do a Kaizen on optical design. And so you see, you can look cross project. So let's say, look, I can go on about this. This is my favorite topic. I've been writing about it for 10 years. And and I never get tired of watching engineers who have a hard time getting their projects on time. They grab this stuff and then they are on time, and watching them and watching the enthusiasm in them. So I can go on about this forever, but I have to move on because we're going to run out of time. What about some next steps? Well, let's say you're interested in this. Well, one thing we can do is we can come and at Lean Focus, we can come and provide you go take one of your projects. I try to avoid Kaizens for Kaizens. In other words, just come and teach you visual project management, then we'll get to a project Kaizen for a project later. No, I show up and we do a project while I'm there. And then we use that project as our lighthouse. We can do this virtually or on site, although we usually recommend the first engagement be on site so we get to know each other. But and then after you're doing these for a while, you can do them virtually and on site. Depends on the project and where the people are. Anyway, this is a one-pager, and like Damon said, you can get a copy of this. If there's more you want to learn on innovation, then there's a few things I wanted to mention to you. One of them is I do one of these webinars every month with Lean Focus, and Damon or April introduced me and they support me. But most of the time we spend just talking about innovation and then doing some Q&A at the end, which I got a minute to get to. I do a weekly innovation journal, an innovation journey. It's a weekly LinkedIn newsletter. So if you just go to LinkedIn and look up me, you can sign up for my newsletter. And it's just a little 5-minute read that I put out every Monday. I put out one today about oversubscription and overworking people on a regular basis. And then, if you don't mind, a short advertisement in my last seconds. I do have a couple of books I've written that are available on Amazon. My most recent one is Improve, the Next Generation of Continuous Improvement for Knowledge Work. It's lean thinking, but just applied to knowledge work. Nothing in the factory. It's not meant for the office or for healthcare. This is meant for, what typical, when I say knowledge work, product development, sales strategy. It's generally, think of it as people, you basically went to college to learn the skill that you're doing, and we're applying lean to that. And then there's some upcoming, all the webinars we do in innovation and all of our others are available at Lean Focus. You can go here to get them. And we'll close with a famous quote here from Churchill about letting our worrying let that energy turn into planning. And as you guys saw, the basis of a fever chart, the basis of visual management is having a good plan that I can come back to in a month and say it worked. Or this is what didn't work, excuse me, and now I can see the gap between what I thought. So we want to begin with thinking and planning and then execution. And so with that, I'll hand it back over to Damon and look forward to getting questions from you.
Great, thanks, George. Got several questions here. Let me start with the first one. How does a project manager know that there is 6-week buffer to squeeze instead of requiring 4 weeks buffer or 8-week buffer? Does the project manager need to know the distributed buffer for each task by asking each team colleague and add them together to get the total as 6 weeks?
That is such a great question. And I will say that there are people that do it that way, but I think that's such a heavy way to do it. What I would say, here's how I would recommend, here's how I answer the question. And then I want to come back with one caveat. Look at the type of project you're doing and the overall risk. So if I'm working on, version 6.7.4 of firmware and it looks a whole lot like 6.7.3, I know that firmware, I know how this is going to go. I can go with a small buffer, 15, 20%. Typical R&D projects, I have my best luck at about 25, maybe 30. I kind of look at the risk. If you're doing a very research-oriented project, like for example, if you're developing technology and not a product at all, it might be 50. And so part of it is you look at the buffer and you make a judgment of the overall project. You remind people, and I showed you, remember that slide, I made a real point about this. Don't worry, this is all between us. I'm not telling the boss anything but the July 12th date. All right, so if you commit to something and the buffer isn't quite what you thought, we'll burn a few extra days and then we'll know to plan better next time. But don't feel like you're exposed, and don't let your teammates feel like you're going to expose them, because you're really only holding them accountable to their original. If you really take a step back, you're holding them to hit their original target by the end of the project or the end of the phase. Now, there's one exception to this that's an important one, and that is if you have an immovable milestone that occurs in your project. So famous example is a show, right? I've got a trade show coming. It's coming on May 1st. It's not moving. And so I can't just buffer, I can't allow the buffer for things that have to be done for that show to extend past that show. Normally, this is a very small issue because when you squeeze the buffer, you see that. One thing we do is we put that show up in the schedule so we never lose sight of that. And so, normally people don't have more than 1 or 2 of those in any given schedule. And so it's enough, in any given phase schedule, they're happening over a 3 or 4 month period. So generally we just keep track of them by exception. That's a great question. That's almost everybody has a question of that form. Thank you so much.
Okay, George, next question. Agile allows stories to easily slide from one sprint to another. Why do we need to add milestones on top of that?
Oh, that's another great question. Yeah, the reason is, and think about a multifunctional project. Okay, if your world is, I'm doing an internal IT project for one group of people, I am a single function that, and all I have, and I can do that. And the only harm that happens is I just deliver my MRP system update a little bit late. But when you're doing a product that you're going to launch, you've got a lot of people depending on you. You've got a sales force that's out there preparing customers. You've got a marketing communication group that's preparing assets. You've got a training group that's preparing a training program, and they're scheduling training with all of the internal folks. You've got production maybe that's building a line for your for the hardware that your software is going to run on. And so you have to meet your milestones, even if you're in Agile. So simple example in Agile, this is one I lived myself. We needed a version that would allow us to test a new FPGA so that we could make the next step in the evolution of the design of a board. Okay, this happens all the time, right? Well, the Agile team didn't know that, and so they let the story slide. Well, then the story didn't get in the release. Well, then we didn't get the test firmware, the test software that we needed for the FPGA until the next release. We lost 3 months in a schedule to the issue I'm telling you about, in probably the single most important project I had, because the Agile team did not map what they were doing against the critical milestones in the projects from the other functions. So I would say, even if you're in Agile, and I'm a big advocate of Agile, it works. I love it. I love what David Anderson did with it as he developed it. You know, I think he really kind of the beginning of that Kanban board that he added back in the early 2000s. I've seen it used successfully time and again. Just take that last step of what you're doing and put it against the milestones that your teammates are relying on you to meet. And if you're don't miss those milestones, or if you are, at the very least, you've got to go in and negotiate that. You can't just slide that into the next story and let happen what may happen.
All right. So the next one is a compliment and a question. So George, great presentation.
Thanks.
Competing priorities is a big issue in my organization. What's a good technique you think to help drive the conversation that everything can't be the priority?
Yeah, well, thank you. Appreciate the compliment. And you know, every engineering group I've ever worked with, this is a struggle, right? Because you know, part of human nature is to live in this world where if I want a $5 million lawsuit settlement, and if I want $1 million in a lawsuit settlement, I'm going to ask for 5. And this is all part of human nature. In fact, this is it's kind of funny. The question's funny because that's exactly what the topic of my newsletter is this morning, or published last night. But so you have bosses that are like, well, if I ask for more, I get more because I put more pressure. But that's what a friend of mine used to call putting more water in a toilet that's running slow so that you can pass more water. Or I like to say it's like putting more cars on a jammed highway. So there is a meeting, every organization I've dealt with that has this issue, and like I said, it's every one of them. Managers are afraid to stop asking for too much for fear they'll get even less. And it's not an irrational fear. Developers live in a world of constantly being asked to do too much. I call it oversubscription. And they kind of live in a world of I can't win. You know, I got so many things I have to do. I can't win. I can only choose where I can lose and by how much. You know, that is not a fun game. So there is there's a cultural evolution that we have to bring up in an organization. And, you know, it's not a simple answer, but, you know, I've certainly seen it done successfully many times. We work with the managers to reduce to what the team can actually do. And then we hold the team. You know, you said you would do it. Yeah, I know, but I really got busy. Well, you know, in the old days that would work, but you knew exactly how busy you were and you still took the commitment. How are we going to do this? And people are shaken. Really, the first time I've seen people just like literally react. I've never had that kind of demand placed on me before. The demand is you do what you said you do. But the other demand is have the courage not to commit to things you know can't be done. And so it's a cultural change that takes time, but I will tell you guys, the amount of value you will get for doing this is just huge. When your organization says, hey, R&D says this project's going to release on November 1st, I know I better have my stuff ready on my production line, on my, my marketing communications material, my training. It better be ready because these guys get done on time. And so what happens is you will step the entire, not just the development group, not just the innovation group, you will step up the entire organization when you get done what you say you'll get done. And so it's a complex evolution, but it's one I've seen done many times before.
All right, another compliment and a question on the theme here. So thanks, George, for the great summary. It's great seeing and hearing you again. I think it's difficult to hide the buffer from upper management. One of the major goals of Lean is to drive transparency across the organization, drive the right conversation, and best team wins. Thank you again for all your help in the past and look forward to working with you in the future. So I think it's just your reaction to the what's perceived as the inability to hide the buffer from upper management. Could you comment?
Yeah, fair point. I need to modify my language. I wouldn't hide anything, and just for everybody on the phone, I would never lie or leave out the truth or mislead or anything like that. That's not what I meant by hide. So I need to get a better word. So thank you for the feedback, making me a little bit better. What I would say is I never report on it. If you want to come down to Gemba, Japanese for where the action's happening, where our schedule is, that Gemba may be physical, come to our room where we have a wall, or that Gemba may be digital, join our daily meeting. Please come, please see how it works. And there you'll see the buffer. But I'm not going to report to you that, hey, if everything goes really good, we'll be done by June 3rd. The team is committed to, in other words, I'm not going to walk in and say the commitment is July 12th, but we see a way to June 3rd. That's the part let me say it differently. I will never mention June 3rd in the boardroom. But if you'll come to Gemba and you'll see what we're doing as a team, I'll be happy to show you June 3rd. You can see exactly how we're using it.
All right, so I think I can answer this one for you. So George, are you available to speak at other organizations' monthly virtual meetings? This is such a great topic. That's probably a big yes.
Oh my God, ask my wife. I never want to stop talking about this stuff.
Yeah. So if you're interested in reaching out, you can send an inquiry to george.ellis@leanfocus.com or info@leanfocus.com, and we can help you out there. Let's take one more question.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. The only reason this meeting isn't 3 hours long is because Damon made me hold it to 1.
Next question. Do you have examples of Parkinson's law in real life?
I think I gave you a real example, but I'll be glad to give you another. I get my drawing set finished 98%, and then it's not due until the design review in a month. So I just leave it. And rather than finishing it, circulating it to my colleagues and moving it through the review process, I wait until 2 days before the review, and then I send it out to everybody. And I could have just put 3 more hours of work in, and I could have finished up my drawing stack. I got I'm working on a new software set, but I haven't done my unit test. I pushed all my unit tests out to the end. You guys, everybody who works in Agile and works with unit tests knows that that's a behavior we're always trying to stop people doing. You should be doing your unit tests as you develop, but gold plating would be, I get all the code working, everything's there. All I got to do is just add a few more unit tests before it can go through before the unit tests are effective. And I just put all that off to the end, even though it's probably an hour's worth of work. So I mean, it's everywhere that you ever went and got something 95 or 98% done, and then just stopped and waited till somebody called you and bugged you for it.
Great, thanks. George, real quick reminder, the next webinar topic is what and when is it?
Oh, I am sorry, I don't have that memorized. We do one every month on, I'm gonna look them up real quick. I think I can tell you,
see if I can beat you to the answer.
Sorry about that.
So,
I'm really excited about doing these.
So the next one is February 23rd, and it is called Charting the Course for Future Growth with Product Portfolio Management. That would be the next one.
Yeah, and for that question that came to me about how do we keep from oversubscribing, that's the tool, Project Portfolio Management. That's the tool that plugs into your visual project management. Think of the two of them working together. That's the management tool, and the management part where we actually are tracking what folks are doing and we're not overcommitting folks. So that's kind of that's the partner to visual project management. But remember I told you, visual project management makes us more efficient. We just can't be asking people to do more than they can really do, or they get a jammed highway. That's kind of those two. The two parts of a team that runs on time. And so that next one on the 23rd, I see it now, of February is the other half.
All right. Great job as usual, George. Thank you again. So thank you everyone on the call. Again, a reminder, this webinar recording will be emailed to you one day after the conclusion of today's call. And should you need any further assistance, here's our contact information on this slide. You can email us at info@leanfocus.com or call us directly, or you can look at the website to explore these topic areas that George has covered and some of the other things we opened up with. Thank you and have a great rest of your day. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody.